Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Real Beef. I'm Don Keith. Today, I have a real beef with Nick Cannon, who declared that white people are animals and less than people of color. Also, the city of Bristol in the United Kingdom replaces one racist statue with a more racist one. All that and more when we return on The Real Beef.
Join me, Don Keith, in my quest for truth and answers to all my beefs, here on The Real Beef.
Hey guys, welcome back. Well, today I gotta tell you, I'm a little sad because a guy I once thought was a good and decent person has shown his true colors. Now, I'm talking about celebrity Nick Cannon. Now, I want to give you guys the backstory here. I actually have a little bit of history with Nick because I was once a contestant on a show he used to host. Called America's Got Talent. And so when you're a contestant on a show like that, there is quite a bit of downtime where you're waiting on interviews and taping to begin. So you get to interact with folks who are producing and starring in the show. And I got to have a few conversations with Nick, and I have to say, from personal experience with him, he was a super nice guy and all-around cool dude, I thought. So, this story makes me even more disappointed because it's kind of a letdown, really, when you have a positive opinion of someone and they do something so horrendous that it just ruins that opinion. And, I'm guessing a lot of folks out there were let down by Nick this week as well because of his anti-Semitic views and opinions of white people, and it's just really sad. But, I don't want to put words in the guy's mouth, so I'm going to play this clip of him in a second from a show he did with a guy named Professor Griff. Now, Professor Griff, if you don't know, was a former member of the rap group Public Enemy, which also featured acts like Chuck D and Flava Flav. But Professor Griff now is more of a controversial figure whose worldview runs parallel to that of the Nation of Islam. And one of his and their views that is among the more controversial is that the Jews controlled the slave trade and had a disproportionate role in the slave trade comparable to other races. They also believe that the original Jewish population was all black and that they were driven out of Israel and their land and identity was stolen by white people who now claim to be the original Jewish race. Again, that's their view. Make that clear. That's their view, not mine. And this whole view of the Jews somehow having a disproportionate role in slavery was popularized in a series of books which were written by the Nation of Islam entitled The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews. But the truth is, no race is innocent in the slave trade. All of our races and our ancestors were involved. In fact, in a 1994 article by a guy named David Brian Davis, who was an emeritus professor of history at Yale University and author of an award-winning trilogy of books about slavery, he noted that Jews were just one of countless religious and ethnic groups around the world to participate in the slave trade. The participants in the Atlantic slave system included Arabs, Berbers, scores of African ethnic groups, Italians, Portuguese, Spaniards, Dutch, Jews, Germans, Swedes, French, English, Danes, white Americans, Native Americans, and even thousands of New World blacks who had been emancipated or were descended from free slaves, but who then became slave-holding farmers or planters themselves. Okay, did you catch that? Shocker. So freed slaves in this country gained their freedom, then went and bought slaves of their own. Okay, now the most notable of these is the very first slave owner in the United States who was a former indentured servant named Anthony Johnson. You see, before slavery, Africans were brought here under indentured servitude contracts, which means they would be obligated to work for 7 or 8 years, then they would earn their freedom. But in the case of a man named John Kasser, he served out his contract, which was then purchased by a former indentured servant who was Anthony Johnson, a black man who had been freed. And so after John Kasser served an additional 8 years under contract to Johnson, Johnson then refused to free him, at which point Kasser took Johnson to court, and the court ruled in favor of Johnson, who would retain John Kasser as his slave for the rest of his life. Okay, so John Casser was the very first slave in this country, and his owner, Anthony Johnson, a black man, was the very first slave owner in our history. Now, that is according to Smithsonian Magazine. It's very sad. A black man owned a black man and refused to give him his legal freedom. So no single race is innocent of slavery. Okay? So I digress there a little bit, but I want to play this excerpt of Nick Cannon so you guys can all hear why I'm so disappointed in this guy. So here you have it, folks. If you haven't seen it, this is Nick Cannon in an interview with Professor Griff.
Then let's go to what it really is then. When we talk about the power of melanated people, when we talk about who we really are as guys, and understanding that our melanin is so powerful and it connects us in a way that the reason why they fear black, the reason why they fear is because the lack that they have of it. So then when you see what, Dr. Francis C. Welsing talked about is that fear in that
just genetic annihilation,
deficiency of when you have a person that has the lack of pigment, the lack of melanin, that they know that they will be annihilated. So therefore, however they got the power, they have the lack of compassion. That melanin comes with compassion. Melanin comes with soul. That we call it soul. We soul brothers and sisters. That's the melanin that connects us. So the people that don't have it are a little, and I'm gonna say this carefully, are a little less, and where the term actually comes from, because I'm bringing it all the way back around to Minister Farrakhan, to where they may not have the compassion or the when they were sent to the mountains of Caucasus, when they didn't have the power of the sun, that the sun then started to deteriorate them. So then they're acting out of fear, they're acting out of low self-esteem, they're acting out of a deficiency. So therefore, the only way that they can act is evil. The only way they have to rob, steal, rape, kill, and
fight or flight,
in order to survive.
Exactly.
So then these people who didn't have what we had, and when I say we, I speak of the melanated people. Right. They had to be savages. They had to be barbaric. Because they're in these Nordic mountains. They're in these rough, torrential environments. So they're acting as animals. Right. So they're the ones that are actually closer to animals.
So there you have it, folks. If you have less melanin in your skin, then you are less of a human. Okay, and you are an animal, according to Nick Cannon. That sounds a lot like KKK language in reverse to me. What do you guys think? So while I am very disappointed, I think Mr. Cannon has learned a hard lesson, because since this interview, he was released, or excuse me, since the interview was released, Viacom has severed all ties with Nick. Okay. And I'm afraid any hosting or acting gigs or comedy gigs he might otherwise have garnered may be in jeopardy. But who am I kidding, right? Because Hollywood and the liberal elites have a way of excusing their own behavior. And now that Nick has apologized, okay, because he's oh so sorry for being an ignorant, racist bigot, that I'm sure he'll go into hiding for a couple of months, and then he'll be welcomed back into the fold with open arms. That's what always happens, right? When the liberal elites, they cross into the racist territory, they're easily forgiven. Okay, not so for conservatives. It's pretty sickening, really. So anyway, I'm going to move on here, and I want to stay on the topic of race because there is an interesting story over in the United Kingdom in a town called Bristol where Black Lives Matter rioters pulled down a statue of a man who was once involved in the slave trade. His name was Edward Colston. Now, of course, the statue of him wasn't erected because he was a slave trader. It was erected because the man did a lot of good philanthropic works for the city of Bristol, donating money to churches and schools and housing for the poor. Sounds a lot like the founding fathers here in the United States, who did many great works but were a product of their times and engaged in slavery, which we all know now is an abhorrent practice. But the statue isn't the only remaining homage to Colston in the city. Okay, his name permeates throughout Bristol, having Colston School, Colston Concert Hall, Colston Street, Colston Avenue, etc., etc. Just like here, when we tear down statues of Columbus and Jefferson and Washington, now Lincoln and even Frederick Douglass, Okay. What about the thousands of infrastructure pieces that also bear the names of our forefathers? Are we going to get rid of them all? Okay. And what about America, named after Amerigo Vespucci? All right. Can't call it that anymore. Okay. Vespucci was also a slaveholder. So the whole premise of erasing statues as if it will somehow change history is founded in stupidity, really. These statues should all be left alone and used as learning tools and reminders that greatness isn't achieved without mistakes along the way. I mean, sometimes horrible mistakes. But the kicker here about this Colston statue in Bristol is that after it was toppled from its plinth, it was replaced by a much more sinister and racist statue of a woman dressed in new Black Panther attire, raising the racist fist of Black power. This is a symbol that is still used today to represent the ideals of a racist organization whose admitted goals are things like Black autonomy and Black separatism, Black nationalism, and really just pretty much Black supremacy all around. In fact, the United States Commission on Civil Rights and the Southern Poverty Law Center have both called the new Black Panther Party a hate group. And the artist who sculpted the statue, Mark Quinn, his inspiration for the statue came from a Black Lives Matter protester, Jen Reed, who was photographed standing on the empty plinth with the raised fist after the Colston statue was thrown into Bristol Harbor. And so I'd like to know what this woman has done for the community of Bristol in order to be paid such a tribute. Did she donate money to hospitals or schools? What about churches or houses for the poor? Surely, if she replaced a philanthropist like Edward Colston, she has more to offer than the simple fact that she can raise a Black fist of power. Okay, but the good news, ladies and gentlemen, the good news here is that this Black Power statue has already been removed after an outcry of patriots protested the hateful image. In fact, it was taken down today, I believe, and hauled away. Now, I don't know if it was given back to the artist or disposed of or what, but at least the citizens of Bristol no longer have to look at it. Okay, and so while I'm on the subject of the UK, I want to give a shout out to my brother in ideology over there, Tommy Robinson, who is just such a patriot for his country and for the liberation of Britain. Okay, it's time for all of Britain to join him in his great works and eradicate the hateful ideology of the Marxists and the pedophiles being imported into our sister country. Okay, God bless you, Tommy Robinson. We are all here with you. Okay. All right, guys, that's going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for watching. Please do me a favor and hit the like and subscribe button, and check out our podcast in the description below, as well as our Facebook, Twitter, and Parler accounts. Also, if you have any questions or topics you'd like to hear about, feel free to put them in the comments below, and we'll see you next time. I'm Don Keith. You've been watching The Real Beef.
Join me, Don Keith, in my quest for truth and answers to all my beefs. Here on The Real Beef.